Well, it has certainly been a long time since we've seen Paul Maurice back in Winnipeg, and on Tuesday night, on December 6th, the Winnipeg Jets will take on the Florida Panthers for the first time since Paul Maurice has taken over as head coach of the Florida Panthers. So I thought this would be a fun video to, look at what Paul Maurice has done so far through 25 games in Florida, right before the Jets game, and, look back at what Florida was doing last year. Obviously, last season, Florida was a very good team. They won the President's Trophy. They had 122 points. That is incredible on its own. But, they headed into the playoffs, and it was a little bit disappointing. They left earlier than they expected, and they didn't bring back Andrew Burnett. And, a lot of people said that, Burnett wasn't really like a great coach. He was just coaching a really great team. And that's kind of how the Panthers front office saw it as well, because they went ahead and let him go, let him walk. They didn't re-sign him to a contract, and they hired Paul Maurice, who had, recently stepped down as the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets in December. Paul gets a new job in the summer, and he takes over the Florida Panthers. So through 25 games, Paul has had the reins. Let's see how he's done so far. So first of all, we're going to look at the 2021-2022 Panthers. They had some really elite team stats, and they led the league in a lot of categories, or were at least in the top 10 for most of them. The Panthers led the league in goals for per game at 4.11. That is absolutely insane. They're averaging at least 4 goals per game, right? Now, with how impressive that stat is, you'd probably assume that they have a pretty good power play as well, and they did. In fact, it was the best in the league, sitting at 24.4%. Now, their penalty kill was middle of the road, not terrible, sitting at 79%. That was good for 16th in the league, and to finish the year, goals against, they were 12th. So top half of the league in goals against as well. So the Panthers last year, very good overall stats. Obviously offense was their bread and butter, but they weren't totally terrible defensively either. Now, if we look at this season's Florida Panthers under Paul Maurice, they have 3.48 goals for per game, which is still pretty solid. I mean, that's 9th in the league. Obviously, they don't have Jonathan Huberdeau anymore, but Matthew Tkachuk has come in, and he's that team's leading scorer right now, and, not really missing a beat from last season. He's playing really well there. And now where it becomes a little bit concerning is the power play. Last season, it was number 1 in the league at 24.4%. So far this season, it's sitting at 21.1%, which, still isn't a bad percentage, but it's sitting at 20th in the NHL. And the PK, same kind of thing. It's kind of dipped a little bit. It's now at 77.7%. Obviously, we're only 25 games in. It's not the biggest deal ever, but it is 21st in the NHL and does need, some work. And right now they're sitting at 22nd in goals against with 82 this season. The defense isn't what it used to be. Obviously, Mackenzie Weegar is not there anymore. He got traded with Jonathan Huberdeau for Matthew Tkachuk, and that really sucks for the Panthers because he was a very important part to that team, and he's just not there anymore, and that defense is pretty thin. But the way that Paul has gone about the defense this year has been a little bit confusing. Him and Bill Zito have come together to really build one of the most pathetic defensive cores in the league right now. It's headlined by, obviously, NHL All-Star Aaron Ekblad. However, he was hurt for quite a bit of the beginning of the season, and Brandon Montour stepped up, played really well, so good for him. But everybody else there, I don't know, man. Mark Stahl at 35 on your second pairing, probably not what you need. Gustav Forsling, well, being, an all-right defenseman, probably better suited to be in the 5th, 6th spot, probably not wanting him playing top 4 minutes consistently. And then, of course, Rafael Gudas, who is just kind of there, honestly. He's just a big guy, big veteran, and that's what Paul loves. And of course, that is probably why Mark Stahl is in there, right? Paul loves his veterans, and it's been apparent throughout his whole time here in Winnipeg how many veteran centers did the Jets have that really didn't do anything. Nate Thompson comes to mind. While he wasn't bad, he really didn't make a big impact at all. There's countless other ones, but just, giving Blake Wheeler at 34 years old, 28 minutes of ice time, a lot, consistently, a lot of games over 20 minutes of ice time. And he's carried those habits of playing his veterans a lot into Florida, as now, obviously guys like Verhaeghe, Barkov, and Tkachuk, they're going to get their minutes, but he has constructed probably the oldest, most useless 4th line in the NHL currently, with the likes of guys that are well past their days. Nick Cousins is probably the best guy on this line. line, and then you've got Eric Stahl, who wasn't even in the NHL last year. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but then Patrick Hornqvist on the right wing, who is making a lot of money to be on the fourth line and just kind of not doing a whole lot. His best days are over. But going back to Eric Stahl for a moment, you know, he's a free agent, obviously, coming into this season. And Paul looked at the situation as, hey, I'm going to bring back my buddy Eric from when I won a cup with the 2006 Hurricanes. Okay, so they bring him in, and that means that they have to drop a player to make cap space and clear a roster spot. And who did they get rid of? They got rid of Rudolph Balcers, who's obviously not the biggest name in the world. However, he's only 25 years old. He had 2 goals, 2 assists in 14 games with the Panthers. They just signed him, and he's on league minimum. So a guy with a decent bit of, flexibility. He can be a scoring winger. He can really do whatever for you. He's a pretty pesky guy, and you just dropped him so that you could bring back the fossil, the dead corpse of Eric Stahl. And the biggest issue that I have is just the poor asset management just to bring back your old friend who's probably not going to have that big of an impact for you. So far, he's done pretty much nothing, as expected. The guy's well past his days in the NHL, and you lost a really good, bottom sixer, good scoring depth guy for nothing. He got claimed by Tampa Bay on waivers, and that was the end of it. So I just don't understand that. Paul's done stuff like this in the past before, where he really favors his favorites. Obviously, Blake Wheeler was definitely one of those guys, and it didn't help Blake, and it didn't help the team at all. So now you look at where the Panthers are so far this season. They are outside of the playoffs, looking in currently. They are chasing a wildcard spot. They are out of the top 3 in the Atlantic. That is not where they wanted to be, and where a lot of people didn't think they would be sitting. A lot of people thought that they would be right up there fighting with Toronto, Tampa, and Boston, right? But right now, that is not the case. Florida is wildly inconsistent, and up until their recent 2 games had been on a pretty ugly streak where they went 1-3-3 in their 7 games. In the last game, they didn't have Alexander Barkov, and after the game, Paul Maurice was asked what the Florida Panthers had to do to get back on track. And he gave a really uninspiring answer and said, "We need to get Alexander Barkov back in the lineup." And that is just not what you want to hear as a player, as a fan, as really anybody that's associated with the Florida Panthers. It comes off like Paul doesn't really believe in the lineup that he's fielding without Alex Barkov, and obviously Barkov's a big part of that team. However, you need to find ways to win without your star players, and Rick Bowness has done that with the Jets this season. Obviously, with Nikolai Ehlers being out for the majority of the season, they're still successful. They're still winning games. It's very much next man up mentality in Winnipeg, and it's not really the same in Florida. Now, you can argue that, maybe the Florida Panthers don't have the best depth in the league at forward or defense, but they had depth at forward. They did have good forward depth in Rudolph Balcers. Now they don't. Now they have a really old, slow fourth line, and if you look on defense, the hiring of Mark Stahl, it's great that you bring in the Stahl brothers, but what do they really do? He's 35 years old. Mark Stahl hasn't been good in about 5 years, and he's just really not doing much for this Florida team, who is desperately missing Mackenzie Weegar. There's just so much wrong with the Florida Panthers, from coaching to the lineups and to upstairs, the general manager Bill Zito. There's just so much that needs to be changed with this team, and I'm not sure that it will be changed for the good under Paul Maurice and Bill Zito. And now something coming up in the near future here for Florida is they're getting Anthony Duclair back, and that is going to help out the lineup big time and really add a sense of depth in there. However, they will have to move out some money to bring in Duclair, because at the moment he's on LTIR. He's recovering from a torn Achilles tendon, I believe, and once he's activated, they're going to be over the cap. So who are they going to move? A lot of people speculated that Anthony Duclair would be moved before he was activated so that they wouldn't have to move anybody out, but it doesn't seem like that is, right now the interest of the Florida Panthers. And then your next step is to look at, okay, well, maybe the Panthers will, maybe move on from Patrick Hornqvist. And it does make sense because he makes $5.3 million this season. He's not really bringing a lot to your team on the fourth line. He has digressed quite a bit from his Pittsburgh days. It might be time to move on. However, when they traded for him from Pittsburgh, he made them promise that he wouldn't be moved. And I can't believe that Florida is honoring that. Like, I get, like, okay, be nice to the guys in your organization and everything like that, and have a good reputation. However, in this situation, are you really willing to lose a core asset of your team for, keeping a promise that you made 2 years ago? And that does appear to be the case. They are unwilling to trade Patrick Hornquist because of that promise. That was reported on Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts podcast with Jeff Merrick. They talked about that. And now you have to think, okay, well, who is the next guy up likely to leave Florida then if they want to keep Duclair and Hornquist? The only two realistic options that I see are Sam Reinhart, who makes $6.5 million. He might be a little bit harder to move, or Sam Bennett. My reasoning with this is that the Panthers aren't going to move any of their defensemen. They don't really have anybody outside of Ekblad really making big money anyway. And in their forward core, if you're not getting rid of Hornquist and you're not getting rid of Duclair, you're definitely not getting rid of Matthew Tkachuk, Carter Verhaeghe, Sasha Barkov. So you have to look at what else is left. And the only guys making any significant money are Sam Bennett and Sam Reinhart, who are both having really good years, might I add. All this to make the point that if the Panthers aren't willing to get rid of Patrick Hornquist, a guy that's really not doing much for you, or say a guy like Anthony Duclair, who's just coming off of an Achilles injury, who knows how good he's going to be when he comes back, then you're going to have to move one of your better core players that are already proving to have pretty good years, such as Sam Bennett and Sam Reinhart. So I just don't get the thought process behind that. I understand you made a promise, but sometimes you need to go back on those in the NHL. It is a business. Life sucks sometimes in the NHL, and at the end of the day, you can't all be buddy-buddy with everybody. And if the Panthers do end up losing a big piece to their puzzle, it's just another poor move and just more poor asset management by Bill Zito, by Paul Maurice, by this Florida team, and it's just not great, and it really reminds me of how the Jets functioned in the last few seasons. So to conclude this video, guys, I don't believe that Paul Maurice is the sole issue with the Florida Panthers. I think they have a lot of issues going on right now with that team from top to bottom. However, I don't think that Paul is helping anything with his veteran bias, with how he runs his lineup, and I think that it hurts the team a lot on game day. We'll see how some of these situations go and how some of these storylines move on as the season progresses. Of course, we are only 25 games in, so who knows? The Panthers might go on a heater. Maybe Paul will win the Jack Adams, who knows? But yeah, we'll revisit this later on in the year, but I want to know from you guys, are you excited to see the former coach of the Winnipeg Jets, Paul Maurice, back in Winnipeg? How did you feel about Paul when he was here during his tenure with the Jets? And hey, if you're a Florida Panthers fan stumbling upon this video, what are your thoughts on Paul Maurice? I want to hear all about that. Do you like him? Do you hate him? I'd love to hear from you. But until then, everybody, I'm going to take off. I will see you in the next one. Go Jets, go. Bye-bye.